Yo, what's up, folks? I'm Hidden Stories Unveiled, and I dive deep into the stories that totally mess with your head. Today, we're talking about something real. It's a throwdown between respect and straight-up arrogance, a rich boss playing dirty, and a janitor keeping it 100. You ready? Let's get into what went down. The invitation came during the lunch rush, when the building smelled of disinfectant and burnt coffee. The boss stood near the elevators in a tailored suit, smiling too wide, holding a white envelope between two fingers. He said the janitor's name loudly, so everyone could hear. He thanked him for years of loyal service and announced a personal invitation to an exclusive black-tie dinner at his estate. Applause followed, forced and uneven. Laughter leaked from corners where people thought it couldn't be heard. The janitor froze, mops still dripping onto the marble floor. This wasn't appreciation. It felt staged. The boss's smile never reached his eyes, and his voice carried the same tone he used when firing people on Fridays. The envelope looked expensive, heavy, like it carried a cost instead of a reward. Coworkers whispered behind their hands. Some looked amused, others relieved it wasn't them. A few avoided his eyes entirely. Someone muttered that he should feel honored. Someone else joked about whether they even allowed people like him inside those gates. He tried to remember if he had done something wrong. He worked late, arrived early, never complained. He cleaned offices where decisions were made that never included him. He emptied trash filled with half-eaten meals that cost more than his weekly groceries. He had learned long ago that attention from powerful people rarely came without strings. The boss stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound kind. He said it would be good for morale. He said it would inspire others. He said everyone deserved to see how the other half lived, at least once. His hand rested briefly on the janitor's shoulder, firm, possessive, as if the answer was already decided. In that moment, the janitor felt something twist in his stomach. Not pride, not gratitude. He imagined walking into a room full of polished smiles and hidden knives. He imagined silence when he spoke, laughter when he didn't. He imagined becoming a story people told later, stripping him of dignity one detail at a time. Still, saying no felt dangerous. Refusing the invitation would mark him as ungrateful, difficult, replaceable. He had rent due, medical bills waiting, and a life balanced on thin margin. Pride didn't keep the lights on. Silence usually did. He took the envelope with slow hand. The paper was thick, embossed with gold lettering that spelled his name like it didn't belong to him. The boss nodded, satisfied, already turning away. The moment passed, but the feeling didn't. As the elevators closed, the janitor realized he had just agreed to step into a room where he held no power, and whatever waited for him, there was already planned. He walked back to his cart, heart beating louder than the wheels squeaking beneath it. Around him, work resumed as if nothing had happened, but everything felt different now. The invitation burned in his pocket, heavier with each step. He knew this dinner was not about gratitude, but display. Someone wanted him visible, exposed, out of place. As he cleaned the same floors he always did, one thought followed him relentlessly. Powerful men never invite witnesses without a reason. That night would quietly change everything he believed. The janitor's apartment sat above a closed laundromat, where the windows rattled when buses passed and heat worked only when it felt generous. He stood in front of a cracked mirror, tying a borrowed black tie with hands that had scrubbed floors all day. The suit wasn't his. It belonged to a cousin who once dreamed bigger, then moved away. The sleeves were too long, the shoes pinched. Still, he straightened his shoulders and adjusted the collar, refusing to let the fabric decide his worth. On the small kitchen table lay unpaid bills, a reminder of where he would return tomorrow. He folded them carefully, as if order could soften their meaning. Dinner for the week waited in a plastic container, plain and cold. He didn't eat. His stomach was already tight with questions he couldn't answer. Across the city, the boss stood in a room larger than the janitor's entire apartment. Staff moved silently around him, fixing cuffs, polishing glassware. rehearsing the evening's flow. Crystal chandeliers glowed above marble floors that never saw a mop. The boss reviewed the guest list with amusement, pausing at one name. He smiled again, that same thin smile, and made a note to seat him where everyone could see. This dinner wasn't about charity. It was entertainment, a reminder of hierarchy dressed as kindness. The boss enjoyed moments like this, where gratitude was expected and discomfort was invisible. He believed wealth was proof of intelligence and poverty was a personal failure. Tonight would confirm both. In front of an audience that agreed, the janitor rode the bus in silence, watching the city change through the window. Street lights grew brighter. Buildings rose taller. People boarded wearing confidence like perfume. He kept his eyes forward, holding the invitation like a passport he wasn't sure would be honored. Each stop pulled him farther from familiarity, closer to a place he had only cleaned after others left. He thought about turning back, about saying he felt sick, about protecting himself from whatever waited behind those gates. But something deeper pushed him forward. Maybe it was pride, maybe survival, maybe the quiet hope that this night could mean more than embarrassment. He planned compliments that sounded generous but cut deeply. He imagined the janitor's face when the room fell silent. He imagined applause afterward. Power to him was not just having more. It was reminding others they had less. Inside the estate, chefs tested sauces, musicians tuned strings, and long tables waited under soft light. Every detail was controlled, rehearsed, approved. The boss wanted perfection because perfection left no room for mercy. Mistakes would belong to the invited, not the host. Somewhere between polished silver and folded napkins, a role had been prepared, and it was never meant to flatter the man arriving alone tonight. As the bus stopped for the final time, the janitor stepped onto a road lined with trimmed hedges and guarded lights. He could see the estate in the distance, glowing like a promise not meant for him. He adjusted his borrowed jacket and took a breath that didn't reach his chest. One believed the night would elevate him. Neither realized how permanent this collision would be, or how impossible it would be to walk away unchanged once those doors finally opened. The gates opened slowly, as if deciding whether to let him pass. The janitor stepped forward, shoes sinking slightly into gravel that had never known dirt. Conversation softened when they noticed him, not stopped. A valet glanced at his invitation twice before nodding, confused but obedient. Inside, the air smelled of expensive perfume and polished wood. The janitor paused, unsure where to stand. People flowed around him like he was furniture misplaced in the center of the room. Eyes scanned him quickly, then returned to safer sights, leaving behind quiet conclusions. Some guests assumed he was late staff. A man asked where the restroom was, irritation rising when no answer came. Laughter followed when someone realized the mistake. Apologies never did. The janitor's face warmed, but he kept his hands steady, reminding himself to breathe. Whispers traveled faster than footsteps. Who invited him? Why he was here? Whether this was some kind of joke? Each question felt heavier than the last. He caught fragments of conversation that peeled away pieces of his confidence. He stood straighter anyway, refusing to shrink, even as the room seemed designed to make him disappear. From across the hall, the boss noticed everything. He watched the pauses, the looks, the subtle shifts in posture. He sipped his drink slowly, letting the discomfort stretch longer than necessary. Let the silence speak first. Let judgment bloom on its own. Servers moved gracefully, avoiding the janitor's eyes. Music filled the space, but offered no comfort. It only made his isolation clearer, like a spotlight without warmth. He wondered if this was the point where he should leave. No one would stop him. No one would care. But leaving would confirm every assumption already made. He moved toward a wall, hoping to blend in. Instead, the contrast sharpened. His borrowed suit looked smaller under brighter lights. His hands, rough and marked by work, rested awkwardly at his sides. He thought of the floors he cleaned after nights like this, when the laughter faded and only spills remained. A guest finally asked his name, smiling politely, eyes cold with curiosity. When he answered, The smile slipped. The guest nodded once and turned away. Interest satisfied, the janitor felt reduced to a detail, something briefly noted then dismissed. The boss finally approached, clapping his hands lightly, announcing how honored they were to have such a dedicated member of the team present. Laughter rippled, soft but unmistakable. The janitor realized then that this discomfort was not accidental. It was curated, designed. Applause followed, and with it, a silence that waited for him to react. He forced a nod, feeling the weight of the room press down on his chest. As the evening settled into place, one truth became unavoidable. He scanned the room once more, noticing how every seat was assigned, every path guided, except his. No chair waited, no place was offered. The message was clear without being spoken. Endure, perform gratitude. As servants rang a bell announcing dinner, guests moved away from him instinctively, leaving a small circle of empty space. The boss guided the janitor through the room as if presenting an exhibit. His hand hovered near the man's back, never touching, but close enough to control direction. Each compliment landed crooked, sounding kind while shrinking him at the same time. People smiled on cue, some nodded with sympathy, others hid smirks behind glasses of wine. The janitor listened quietly, responding with short thanks, careful not to say too much. He had learned that words could be twisted faster than silence. His calm seemed to confuse the room. He wasn't apologizing for existing. He wasn't begging to belong. The janitor's card rested at the far end, near the service door, half hidden behind a decorative plant. The boss gestured toward it proudly, as if this placement were an honor. A few guests exchanged looks but said nothing. Plates clinked, chairs scraped. No one questioned the arrangement. As dinner began, the boss raised a toast. He spoke about hard work, about knowing one's place, about gratitude. His eyes returned again and again to the janitor, measuring reaction. The janitor lifted his glass last, taking a small sip, expression steady. He refused to look embarrassed. That refusal irritated the host more than any protest could have. Questions followed, wrapped in politeness. Did he enjoy cleaning such beautiful spaces? Did he ever imagine owning a home like this? Was the work tiring? Each question assumed limits. Each answer he gave was simple, respectful, controlled. He spoke of routine, of pride in doing things well. He did not share dreams. He did not offer weakness. The boss laughed louder than necessary, interrupting him, finishing sentences incorrectly. He corrected details that didn't matter, turning small facts into small corrections. The janitor nodded and let it pass. With every slight ignored, tension tightened, invisible but growing. Some guests began to shift uncomfortably. A woman frowned at her plate. A man cleared his throat, considering a comment he never made. Awareness flickered, but courage did not follow. It was easier to observe than intervene, easier to enjoy the food and pretend this was normal. The boss leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to seem intimate. He praised the janitor's humility, called it rare, called it refreshing. He said some people forgot where they came from. The message was sharp and deliberate. The janitor met his eyes briefly, not in challenge, but not in fear either. That look lasted only a second, but it lingered. The boss straightened, smile tightening. This was not how the evening was supposed to go. The man at the end of the table was absorbing every insult and offering nothing back. No anger, no tears, no collapse. As dessert plates were cleared, the room felt heavier. The humiliations had been gentle, almost polite, but their pattern was clear. The janitor sensed the shift too. Calm had protected him so far, but it was also becoming a problem. He could feel the host recalculating, searching for something stronger, something public. Around them, servants paused, guests leaned forward, and the music faded slightly, as if the house itself sensed the night sharpening toward a moment no one could stop. When the boss stood again, tapping his glass for attention, the conversation stopped. The janitor's hands rested flat on the table. He did not know what was coming next, only that patience was no longer enough, and whatever the boss had planned would not be subtle this time. The boss stood with his glass raised, waiting until the room leaned toward him. He spoke about success, about vision, about people who understood their value and those who served it. His words floated easily, practiced and confident. Then his tone shifted, playful, as if sharing an inside joke. He gestured down the table, drawing attention without using a name. He suggested it was inspiring to hear from people at every level. He said real stories came from those who worked hardest with the least recognition. Laughter rippled, soft but eager. The janitor felt it brush against him like cold air. Every face turned slightly, not fully yet, but preparing. The boss invited a few guests to speak first. Executives praised opportunity. Partners joked about humble beginnings that were never truly humble. Each story ended in applause. The contrast sharpened with every polished sentence. The janitor sat still, hands folded, eyes forward, counting breaths. Then the boss smiled again and said it would be wrong to leave out the man who kept everything running behind the scene. He described long nights, quiet dedication, and loyalty that asked for nothing more than a paycheck. He framed it as respect. It sounded like ownership. Laughter followed, louder now. Some guests clapped lightly, unsure. Others avoided looking at the end of the table. A woman shifted in her chair, lips pressed together. No one spoke up. The moment had momentum, and stopping it would require courage few possessed. The boss turned fully toward the janitor. He said everyone would love to hear his perspective. What was it like, cleaning spaces he would never sit in? What lessons had he learned from watching success up close? The questions were wrapped carefully, but their edges were sharp. Silence spread. The janitor felt his throat tighten. He understood now. This was the trap. Any answer could be twisted. Modesty would sound like ignorance. Honesty would sound like resentment. Silence would look like weakness. He glanced around the table. The boss waited patiently, enjoying the pause. He took a sip, letting the tension deepen. This was the moment he had planned for. The reveal of difference. The proof of hierarchy. The janitor felt heat rise to his face, but his voice remained inside, steady and calm. He did not rush. He did not apologize. He breathed, grounding himself in something older than this room, older than the man smiling across from him. The boss chuckled softly, filling the space. He assured everyone there was no pressure. He said humility was admirable. He said silence could speak volume. The generosity in his tone was almost convincing, but the janitor saw it clearly now. This wasn't an invitation. It was a demand, delivered with applause already waiting. He placed his hands on the table and slowly looked up. The room leaned in, forks paused, glasses suspended midair. Whatever he said next would define how they remembered him. A joke, a confession, a failure. The boss believed he had controlled every outcome. The janitor knew only that remaining quiet was no longer an option. As the boss nodded encouragingly, eyes bright with anticipation, the janitor opened his mouth. The house fell completely silent, and in that silence, the power in the room shifted, just slightly, toward a man everyone had already decided not to listen to. The janitor stood slowly, letting the weight of his body press against the borrowed suit. The room shifted as if sensing the pause, leaning in with collective curiosity. Eyes that had once measured him, dismissed him, and laughed at him now wavered in uncertainty. The music faded into something nearly inaudible, swallowed by the tension that had settled like dust in every corner. He took a breath, long and deliberate, feeling the familiar rhythm of floors swept, bathrooms scrubbed, and hallways cleaned late at night. Those hours had been quiet, unnoticed, but they had taught him observation, patience, endurance, and a depth that no polished exterior could replicate. Every mop stroke had left lessons etched into his bones. How people reveal themselves in small gestures. How arrogance cracks when it thinks no one is watching. Guests shifted in their seats. Forks tapped lightly against plates. A glass rattled somewhere across the table. The boss smiled, assuming control, expecting him to stumble, expecting the silence to crumble like the polite fear it had created. Yet the janitor's pause was not fear. It was calculation, not submission. It was presence, not ignorance. It was depth. In his mind, he traveled to his past, the cramped apartment, the cold winters when the heat refused to work, the nights spent alone with nothing but the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of cleaning products. He remembered the rare moments of kindness, the fleeting generosity from strangers, the knowledge that he had endured more than most could imagine without complaint. These memories were armor, invisible to everyone else, but tangible in the way he carried himself now. The room sensed the shift. Guests exchanged glances. Whispers rose, hesitant at first, then more audible, threading through the space. Why isn't he speaking? Is he nervous? Is he defying him? Curiosity replaced mockery, and uncertainty replaced confidence. The boss's hands tightened on the stem of his glass. Control was slipping. A plan executed perfectly for weeks now threatened to unravel with a single breath, or with none at all. The janitor's eyes swept the room slowly, landing on faces that had never seen struggle, never imagined survival, never understood sacrifice. He saw arrogance reflected back at him, but also gaps of doubt, subtle cracks where empathy might have existed if anyone had looked close enough. He understood that power is fragile, that fear can be manipulated, and that assumptions are far easier to maintain than confront. Time stretched. 1 heartbeat. 2. The silence pressed down like velvet, heavy and suffocating, yet full of unspoken promise. He was no longer a character in someone else's story, no longer a prop in a carefully staged performance. For the first time, he occupied space as his own authority, as someone whose life experience outweighed this curated spectacle. The boss laughed softly, an attempt to reclaim dominance, but it rang hollow. The guests leaned forward again, sensing tension they could not name. Their expectations had been built on a predictable reaction, a faltering, a stumble, a quick apology. Instead, there was nothing but measured stillness, and in that nothing, a storm waited, contained, patient, inevitable. Every eye turned to him now, silent, anticipating, fearful of the unknown. The janitor's lips hovered over words yet unspoken. He was no longer merely responding to a setup. He was preparing to reshape it entirely. Behind the calm exterior, something formidable had been gathering for years, quietly, invisibly, and now it hovered on the edge of revelation. The room held its breath. No one moved. Even the chandeliers seemed to pause. The storm had not yet broken, but everyone could feel the electricity in the air. And in that electric stillness, it was clear the night would not proceed as anyone expected. The janitor's voice was quiet at first, almost hesitant, but it carried a weight that filled the room more than any applause could. "I've spent a lifetime watching," he began, eyes steady on the faces surrounding him, not just observing floors and offices, but people. How they treat each other when no one is looking. How small choices reveal who we are. A murmur passed through the table, polite curiosity mixed with surprise. The boss's lips tightened, a faint flicker of irritation crossing his face. He had expected embarrassment, fear, or at least some awkwardness. Not this. Not confidence rooted in experience. "I've learned," the janitor continued, "that power is not about the things we display. It's about what we give when no one can take notice. Respect doesn't come from wealth or position. It comes from treating everyone with dignity, even those who seem invisible. Leadership is not the applause you receive, it's the responsibility you uphold quietly." Guests shifted in their seats, eyes widened, some swallowed hard. The polished words of executives now felt hollow beside the janitor's simple, lived truth. He did not attack. He did not accuse. He only revealed what was plain to see. And in that revelation, the room began to unravel quietly. The boss laughed nervously, attempting to recover control. "Well said," he said, though it sounded forced. "But surely ambition, success, requires vision, risk, boldness." The janitor tilted his head, a faint smile playing at the corner of his mouth. patient but unwavering. Vision without integrity is a mirror that only reflects itself, he replied. Risk without care leaves destruction behind. Boldness without humility is empty. Laughter in the room stuttered. Guests exchanged glances, uncertain now whether to join or remain silent. The energy shifted imperceptibly, but irreversibly. Where mockery had once reigned, thoughtful hesitation had begun to settle. They realized that the man they had dismissed, the one in the borrowed suit, the one at the edge of wealth and status, spoke more truth than the men and women who believed their privilege was proof of wisdom. I've cleaned floors where great deals were made, he continued, and watched people claim credit for others' work. I've emptied trash that held the remnants of celebrations I wasn't invited to. I've been invisible, and in all that time, I've learned this. Dignity cannot be borrowed, nor purchased. It is earned, quietly, in every choice, in every moment we decide to honor others, even when no one is watching. The boss's smile faded entirely. He opened his mouth to interrupt, but no words came. The guests' applause no longer carried amusement. They clapped softly, uncertainly, as if recognizing a lesson they had never expected to learn tonight. The janitor's calm, deliberate honesty had shifted the weight of judgment. For a moment, the room became still. Even the music, once lively and decorative, felt subdued, hesitant, acknowledging the power now residing in a man they had all underestimated. The boss shifted in his chair, realizing the script he had written, rehearsed, and staged was crumbling. Every insult, every playful slight, now reflected poorly on him, quietly, invisibly, yet unmistakably. The janitor paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the truth settle in without haste. He had not yelled. He had not cursed. He had not exposed secrets. He had merely spoken with clarity, with perspective, and in doing so, he had undone the control of the man who had intended to humiliate him. Eyes lingered on him. The guests saw depth, restraint, and wisdom where they had expected weakness, and in that collective recognition, the first whispers of discomfort spread, uneven and uneasy, like shadows stretching across the polished floor. The humiliation that had been carefully crafted now hovered over someone else, subtle but undeniable, as the janitor's presence, still calm, still dignified, refused to be minimized. The room held its breath as the janitor leaned slightly forward, still calm, letting his presence fill the space. "There's something I haven't mentioned," he said quietly, almost conversational. Yet every word struck like a bell. "Before these walls were polished, before the wealth you see tonight existed, I carried responsibilities no one here could imagine. Lives depended on choices I made quietly, in corners where no applause could reach." Guests shifted, intrigued. Some frowned. Others exchanged glances, suddenly aware that they had underestimated the man at the edge of the room. Whispers began, soft and hesitant, weaving through the once quiet hall. The boss's smile faltered. Control, so carefully staged, trembled under the weight of the room's curiosity. "I've worked for decades," the janitor continued, "not for recognition, but to create stability. I've built networks, protected people, and made sacrifices that no one would have believed if I told them. And through it all, I remained unseen, invisible. But invisible does not mean powerless. Sometimes, the most significant influence comes from the shadows." A pause. The weight of the words settled like gravity. A few guests leaned forward, their earlier amusement replaced by awe. The boss shifted uneasily, sipping his drink to buy time, but his eyes betrayed panic. He realized that the narrative he had controlled, the narrative of hierarchy, superiority, and ridicule, was unraveling. "You see," the janitor said, voice steady, "wealth and spectacle are fragile. They can impress the untrained eye, but they cannot create trust, loyalty, or true influence. Those are earned, often in ways no one sees, often at great personal cost. The foundation of real power isn't silver or gold. It's respect, it's service, it's integrity. And that foundation, though quiet, endures far longer than your applause. A hush followed. The guests began reassessing everything they had assumed. The laughs that once punctuated the evening now seemed shallow. The applause had been premature. Subtle gestures, small words, and quiet attentiveness that had once gone unnoticed now glimmered with new meaning. The janitor was no longer a victim. He was a man whose life had prepared him for this moment in ways the boss could never have imagined. The boss cleared his throat, voice sharp and defensive. I think you're overstating." He paused, realizing that interruption would only highlight the shift. Guests looked at him differently now, their eyes searching for cracks in his composure. The house of power he had built for the evening, the laughter, the subtle humiliations, the scripted applause, was collapsing under the weight of a truth he had ignored. Influence cannot be feigned. The janitor's calm eyes swept the room, acknowledging the shift. He didn't boast. He didn't demand recognition. He simply revealed the depth behind his quiet dignity. And in that revelation, a subtle reversal of fortune occurred. Laughter turned to silence. Smirks vanished. Assumptions dissolved. Guests realized that the man they had expected to bend under pressure was, in fact, the one holding unspoken authority. The boss's face hardened. For the first time that night, he seemed unsure, calculating, grasping for a way to regain control that no longer existed. His power had always been visible, ostentatious, and performative. The janitor's was hidden, grounded, enduring. And now, in one quiet revelation, the balance of the room shifted irrevocably. The janitor leaned back slightly, voice soft but firm. "I've carried a life you cannot imagine, a life built on responsibility and resilience. And tonight, that life is here, in this room, and it cannot be diminished by spectacle or wealth. It's real, it's lasting, and it's more powerful than the illusions you display." The guests breathed differently. The air had changed. Even the chandeliers seemed less imposing. The boss's calculated evening of dominance had begun to crumble, piece by piece, under the weight of a quiet truth that no one expected, and no one could ignore. The janitor's words hung in the air, calm but unyielding, as the room processed what they had just heard. Guests, once amused or indifferent, now regarded him differently. Respect replaced mockery. Silent acknowledgement replaced whispered jokes. The air shifted from performance to reflection. The boss, whose confidence had carried him through decades of curated dominance, now looked smaller, not physically, but in every subtle measure of authority the room had once granted him. He cleared his throat, a forced attempt to regain composure, but the effect was fragile. Guests noticed hesitation in his posture, in the tremor of a hand adjusting a cuff. Laughter that had once served as approval was gone. Smiles felt constrained. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. All attention, willingly or unwillingly, had centered on the janitor, and for the first time, the boss's control was revealed as illusion. The janitor spoke again, softly this time, not to command, but to illuminate. A life of quiet labor, responsibility, and care does not seek applause, he said. It seeks understanding, and sometimes it only finds recognition in the eyes of those willing to see. He let the words settle, allowing the contrast between his integrity and the boss's performance to crystallize without exaggeration or mockery. Guests shifted in their seats. Some lowered their eyes, reconsidering judgments made in passing. Some nodded subtly, acknowledging not just the janitor's experience, but their own complicity in overlooking it. The subtle dynamics of wealth, privilege, and assumed superiority were no longer abstract. They had been made tangible in real time, exposed in the presence of everyone who thought themselves amused observers. The boss tried to smile, but it faltered. A faint flush rose to his neck. He realized that every small humiliation he had orchestrated, every polished insult delivered under the guise of generosity, now reflected more on him than on the man he had attempted to diminish. There was no need for dramatic confrontation, no shouting, no collapse. The consequences were quiet, social, and absolute. Every guest could see the imbalance. Every polite nod, Every glance, every subtle acknowledgement reinforced it. The janitor did not celebrate. He remained calm, composed, measured. His dignity, earned over decades of work, could not be stripped away by spectacle or cruelty. It radiated quietly, like a steady flame, illuminating truths that wealth alone could never obscure. One by one, the room began to mirror that recognition. Conversation softened. Guests spoke in lower tones, careful to consider meaning before words. They reflected, internally, on the difference between appearance and reality, on depth versus showmanship, on respect earned quietly rather than demanded loudly. Even the boss, still seated at the head of the table, felt the moral weight of the evening settle upon him. The power he had wielded so deliberately was now hollow. In place of fear and admiration, there was reflection. In place of applause, there was awareness. And in that awareness, the quiet justice of the evening revealed itself, not explosive, not theatrical, but thorough, precise, and undeniable. The janitor's story, lived and spoken with calm authority, had reframed every assumption. Where there had been ridicule, there was recognition. Where there had been mockery, there was restraint. And where there had been dominance, there was reflection. The balance had shifted. The boss could no longer dominate a narrative that now belonged to the janitor. Not with wealth, not with influence, not with carefully orchestrated charm. As the evening continued, conversation moved forward, quieter, more thoughtful. Guests lingered on the lesson rather than the spectacle. And the janitor, standing at the edge of the table, not triumphant, not boastful, simply present, embodied a truth the room could not ignore. Justice, when earned in quiet integrity, needs no fanfare to be complete. The janitor rose from the table with slow, deliberate movements. He gathered his coat and straightened the borrowed suit, feeling the fabric settle comfortably over shoulders that carried decades of unseen labor. There was no rush in his steps, no eagerness for applause or recognition. The room watched him, but he moved as if they weren't there, as if the weight of judgment no longer mattered. Outside, the evening air was cool and sharp, carrying a quiet relief that contrasted the tension inside. Gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he walked toward the gate, each step measured, purposeful. He thought of the polished floors, the laughter, the subtle cruelty. None of it diminished him. If anything, it affirmed a truth he had always known. Dignity cannot be granted by others. It exists quietly, independently, and endures beyond the transient approval of the powerful. Inside, the boss lingered at the head of the table, glass half empty, voice strained from attempts to reclaim authority. Guests spoke in muted tones, careful, reflective, no longer eager to perform or mock. The careful construction of superiority, of control, of spectacle, had dissolved under the janitor's calm presence. The room had learned, without confrontation, without loud dramatics, the cost of cruelty and the value of integrity. The boss's gaze followed the janitor's retreating figure, calculating, defensive, aware that he could no longer control perception or narrative. Every polite nod, every quiet acknowledgement of the janitor's words weighed against him. He felt the social gravity shift. He had orchestrated humiliation, but the outcome had been inverted in the subtlest of ways. His wealth, his showmanship, his curated dominance, all of it now seemed fragile in contrast to a life quietly well lived. The janitor paused at the steps, looking back only briefly. There was no triumph in his eyes, no gloating, no desire to dominate in turn. He had never sought to prove superiority, only to exist with honesty, respect, and patience. That alone had reshaped the room, and in that moment, he understood the true measure of power. It is not in the applause one receives, but in the composure and integrity one carries through every choice, visible or unseen. Guests continued their conversations, quieter now, reflective, as if they had all been subtly reminded that appearances are deceptive and status is not a measure of worth. Some avoided looking at the boss entirely, while others considered what their own lives might look like if measured by the same standards of quiet responsibility. The janitor's presence lingered in their thoughts, a silent testament to endurance and moral clarity. The boss finally rose, glass in hand, but there was no toast, no clever remark, no commanding gesture. He walked toward the door slowly, the calculated charm stripped away, replaced by something heavier. Awareness, the weight of his choices, the subtleties of his cruelty, and the invisibility of true merit pressed upon him without anyone needing to speak a word. The lesson had already been written in the behavior and composure of a man he had underestimated. The janitor walked down the long driveway, away from the lights, away from the judgments, carrying only himself and the quiet knowledge that he was enough. There was no need for applause, no need for validation, and no need for revenge. His life had been measured in service, resilience, and patience, and tonight had only confirmed the value of that measured path. Behind him, the estate shimmered in gold and crystal, empty of laughter for once, heavy with reflection. The guests carried the weight of a lesson gently impressed upon them. The boss was left with nothing but a mirror of his own arrogance, now visible to everyone who had once been entertained by it. And as the janitor disappeared into the night, simple, steady, unbroken, the moral of the story settled quietly in the air. Respect cannot be bought, status does not define worth, and true dignity always outlasts spectacle. The night ended, not in triumph, not in revenge, but in quiet closure. And in that silence, the lesson lingered, unforgettable, subtle, and complete. The story had reached its conclusion, leaving an echo that would resonate far beyond the walls of wealth and performance.